So I will pass it over to Liza here in a moment. But before I do, just want to note that we are recording today's meeting. So folks that aren't able to make it today will have an opportunity to watch it later. And then Lindsay, who you met earlier, is also taking notes and will be sending out a summary of the meeting following in the next several days. So with that, I'll pass it over to Liza.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I am giving an update on the job forecasting project that we are doing. And it is accurate to call it jobs for, well, you guys know that the Willamette Cove is part of a larger cleanup effort. I'll skip this slide. But we are doing jobs forecasting, but the project is more than that. What we're looking at is placing these forecasted jobs in the framework of equity. So what is an equitable economic outcome for this project in terms of labor? And then how are the jobs forecasted for this project? How do they fit in that? And what can be done to make the work have more equitable outcomes in terms of the people and the companies that benefit from it. So the goal of the study that we were brought on to do is to identify strategies for inclusive employment pathways to meet estimated labor demand that center economic opportunity for historically marginalized communities. So we're not only looking at the number of hours certain occupations will be needed, we're looking beyond that at who will benefit from those jobs and how can we make that more equitable. Kelly and I were brought on in the fall to work on this project, and we had originally intended for the end of June to have a complete report that includes the economic equity framework, but also had very specific numbers around jobs that were needed. But this spring, we realized that we wouldn't be able to do that, to do all of it by this summer. And the reason for that is that the project isn't far enough along in design to come up with that second part, which are those firm numbers around jobs that are needed. So we decided at that point, after looking at some different alternatives, talking to the port, talking to GSI, that the best option was really to go ahead and stick with the June deadline for our initial report, which I'll be talking about for most of my time today, and then hold off on the more detailed forecasts of specific, we will need X number of construction laborers, X number of biologists until the Willamette Cove environmental remediation is at 30% design. So at the end of June, we'll pause and then start working on building the framework as the design gets further along, because we know that there are choices that will be made in the design that will affect how many man hours or how many worker hours will go to certain tasks. And so if we did the entire project now, there would be a much greater possibility of error. So when we came to this conclusion, I know that there was a lot of concern that the community wouldn't have the information that's needed to move forward into making progress on equitable pathways in employment. But the good news is that we are going to have quite a bit of information that can be used to get started with that work at the end of June when the phase 1 report is released. So the new project timeline, phase 1 deliverable, which is end of June, so end of next month, background research, and a labor market analysis. So there we're looking at, we did quite a bit of work looking at the type of work that will be going into the remediation, and then looking at our local labor force and saying, these are the occupations and the type of work that is going to go in, regardless of the specific numbers. We know that certain workers will be needed. And then looking at our local labor force, saying how many workers do we have? Who are they? What groups do they represent? What age groups do they represent? what training pipelines exist here if we need to train up new workers. Are those apprenticeships? Are they formal educational training? What are the different places that we can target that pipeline to affect the workers who are coming through? So all of that, which I'll talk about more, will be in the phase 1 deliverable. Then I realize phase 2 deliverable will start with when environmental remediation design gets to 30%. And that's when we'll come back and do a second round of interviews with employers and with different project folks. We will be looking at other similar projects that have happened and putting together a tool with some specific forecasts of the number of worker hours that we project will be needed. And that will tell us, incorporating things like the fish window and different elements of the project. Is it going to be a 5-year project? Is it going to be an 8-year project? And that will all give us information that will help us build a more specific count of how many workers are needed. And then once we do that, we will deliver the second part of the project. So the phase 1 deliverable, the report that we'll release at the end of June, this is the outline. We're still working on the report, so it might shift around a little bit. But what we're doing with this report is looking at who are the traditionally disadvantaged communities that the port is wanting to target for economic opportunity. And what does that mean? What does economic equity look like in the context of a project like that? And then we're looking at the environmental remediation occupations. What are the different jobs at every level of training and education that will be needed for this work? Through that, we identified some target occupations, looking at the jobs that we think offer the most opportunity for workers. We also have a profile of the employers in the region, not necessarily who are going to do this work on Willamette Cove, but who are capable of doing this work, who in the region does the work that will be needed. What does that look like? How many businesses are available? And are those businesses owned by traditionally disadvantaged or underrepresented groups? We also look at best practices in equitable workforce development, education, training, and experience requirements, and how those two things come together. So there are a number of occupations that require no formal education. There are others that require a bachelor's degree. So where are places in the context of this project that is limited duration where there'll be ways to increase the equity of the pipeline? And we'll be looking at specifically what are the existing training and education infrastructure in the region. Are there places where it can be targeted and how? We'll be talking a little bit funding streams that can relate to expanding that the equitability of the economy. We have some recommendations and next steps. So I wanted to go through just a couple of previews of what will be in the report. The first thing is the target occupations. The way that we identified those is we started with the various occupations that we know will contribute to the remediation of the Cove. And then based on 3 criteria, we identified different occupations that we think will provide the most benefit in terms of equitable economic development. The first is diversity. And so we use 2 different measures of diversity. One is race and ethnicity, and the other is gender, to identify places where workers are not either workers of color or workers who identify as female are not equally represented compared to all the workers in our regional economy. So we're looking at that, and we're identifying places where we could make progress in terms of equity. And then we've also identified some occupations where there already is a lot of diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender, so that we know that those workers exist in our region already. So when there are outcomes in terms of hiring, we'll already be aware that that pool exists. We also looked at the self-sufficiency wage. As the Workforce Board, we do not have an interest in getting people into jobs that don't pay enough to support themselves or their families. So the self-sufficiency wage, if you are not familiar with it, is a very detailed cost of living analysis that that we publish in conjunction with the Center for Women's Welfare at the University of Washington, that looks at the real cost of living for different families by geography. So for every county in Oregon and Washington, they publish how much it costs for different families to make ends meet without public supports in terms of SNAP or welfare, TANF payments, or private supports in terms of free childcare from your church or a food pantry. So the actual self-sufficiency wage has detailed lists of it's like 500 different family types. Obviously, that's way too much information. So we chose to look at how much, what wage is needed for a family of 2 working adults, an infant, and a preschooler. And for that family in the Portland MSA, it's a little more than $22 per hour per working adult to support that family type. And so we really wanted to zero in on jobs that pay that much or very close to that much, with the idea that if we are looking to increase economic equity, we're certainly not going to do that by increasing diversity in very low paying jobs. Then the last thing we looked at is a growing base of employment. This project, Willamette Cove, the entire Portland Superfund site cleanup, these are limited duration projects. They're going to end. And we were concerned that funneling a lot of money into an occupation that is declining, or where the workers who are trained won't be able to find work in the future, isn't the best use of resources. So we wanted to make sure that these jobs are projected to grow over the next decade. Then we looked at intervention opportunities. So these are places during the awareness, training, hiring, retraining, retention pipeline, where we can make, and we as global, interventions to increase diversity in the workforce. So awareness, exposure of environmental remediation occupations, awareness, exposure of jobs, specifically through the Portland Harbor cleanup, training, hiring, on-the-job training, continuing education, incumbent worker training, and retention. These are all places where efforts can be made to increase diversity, and for different jobs, depending on the amount of education and training that are needed, we have different recommendations for how they can be targeted. So as far as our phase 1 deliverable recommendations, this is, again, this is a preview. The full report will be released at the end of June, but our recommendations are to take a multi-pronged approach: short-term training and long-term education, network education outreach, begin foundations of awareness now, and influence demand for hiring, inclusive procurement mechanisms, drive the market. So these are things that people can start working on now before we have those exact numbers in probably 2023. And then the next steps for the phase 1 deliverable: there's a phase 2 report, timing and the research questions. That's what we'll be working on internally, and of course, making public as we go forward. And then what can people focus on now? How can they use this information? So this will be included in the report. And that is And that is my update.
Thank you so much, Liza. I really appreciate you providing that overview of the focus of the work and kind of just to remind everybody what the intent of the project is and kind of what's kind of on tap next and that timeline. Do folks have any questions or comments for Liza and the work systems effort? I see Barbara Quinn. I can't tell if you're raising your hand or you're just applauding.
I think I'm trying to raise my hand, but
okay.
I might hit the wrong thing.
Okay.
I have a question for Liza. I'm wondering how the influence on private businesses works in regard to diversity hiring. I mean, some private businesses have their own diversity requirement, but if they do not, how is that influenced, or how can that be influenced, or can that be influenced?
I am actually going to hand that question over to Kelly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Barbara, for that question. I think, in our list of preliminary recommendations, the third one is about inclusive procurement policies. So the responsible parties in their work to hire the private employers, because you're exactly right. I mean, it's what is the mechanism to influence the private business practices, and that's where the opportunity is, and a very clear intervention that is done throughout the country. It's a best practice. So really, it's about what you put in the RFP language, the request for proposals. There's pretty clear ways that you can have hiring targets, goals with employers, and even locally, there's a lot of successful examples in construction, but also in other industries where it's basically the owners or the agencies that are charged with the cleanup can do a lot with their RFP language to ensure that they're hiring the right employers, and then they can track the hours and who they're performed by and the workforce that way too. So does that help answer your question?
Yes, it helps.
Okay.
The RFP is going to be designed by whom? EPA or the private business, basically? The potential.
I think that's going to be the critical questions to try to get ahead of and be proactive around. I don't know if there's anything that the EPA would put in the consent decree, but some way that ideally the employers hear from all the cleanup owner, all the responsible parties the same. I mean, that would standardize the market. So if there is a way for a lot of the parties to work together to develop that inclusive procurement language, it would make the whole cleanup much easier, because you'd be signaling to the market and to the private businesses the same set of expectations.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Randy? Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think it's my understanding that the RFPs are designed by their respective PRPs. So, whoever's doing contracting from the public agencies. So for example, the contract that we currently have for remedial design from Willamette Cove, that was an RFP that came in partnership from the port, city, and the state. I think Metro was part of that, but I think that's an area where both each respective agency has the ability to shape the inclusive procurement tool. It's been the advocacy of a coalition of community groups, including PHCC and BGA and others, of trying to get some model PRPs to try to capture that in the consent decree. And so we could try to get sort of a harbor-wide set of inclusive procurement standards. Yeah, anyway, I'll pause there. But I think that's a really good question on who actually gets to design the RFPs. So I think the folks on this call have a lot of power in that respect. And I guess I'll maybe Kelly, an example to highlight would be the regional workforce equity agreement. Could be seen as an inclusive procurement tool as well. So I just want to at least give a shout out to at least a regional policy that some of these agencies are at least a current party to.
Thank you, Ramphis. Any other questions or comments? Ramphis, did you have another question, or is your hand still up from the last time? Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay.
And I put a link in the chat on that because that's a really good example, Ramphis, because I know it's multi-agency agreement that was just passed by Metro, Multnomah County, and the city of Portland.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, if there aren't any more questions for Liza and Kelly, we're going to go ahead and transition to Brian Moore with Metro, who's going to be sharing an update about what's happening with the contingency remedy for the upland. Brian?
Hi, everyone. I think my location doesn't have sufficient bandwidth for me to provide video and audio, so I'll be audio only for this brief presentation. My name is Brian Moore. I am the project manager for the contingency remedy analysis for Metro. The update that I have is pretty brief. We kicked off an analysis of the contingency remedy for the upland work that we're doing at the Willamette Cove. Earlier this year, we put together an RFP with input from the tribes and folks from PHCC. That RFP was then advertised. We received a proposal from just one proposal from Mal Foster Alongi, MFA. And so we are working with MFA to conduct the analysis. In the development of the report, we've continued our work with PHCC and with the tribes to provide input on the outline and the content of the report itself. So as we continue to refine the document, we basically have we got input at the outline stage. We advanced the report to a 30% draft that was reviewed by the folks that I mentioned. We've been incorporating their comments, and we got to an 80% draft just recently. That 80% draft has been circulated to those folks, and we're hoping to get all of those comments back, I believe by the end of the week or early next week at the latest. And then we will fold all of those comments into what will ultimately become our final report. We are hoping to have that final report completed by June 8th. And once we've got that report in hand, we'll be taking the results of the analysis to the Metro Council in the form of a work session to present the content to them and to provide some background information on how we got to the analysis that we did. Then we are anticipating some government-to-government conversations between Metro and some of the tribal governments in the region. And so we would expect to have those after that work session. And then we're looking to the end of July for council to make a decision about the contingency remedy analysis. So for those of you that don't know what the contingency remedy is, DEQ provided Metro an option to either follow their recommendation, which was to contain the moderately contaminated soils on site in a engineered structure called a containment cell. There's a number of these containment cells in the vicinity that we've toured to kind of take a look at and get a better sense of how they work and how they function. And DEQ has allowed us to ultimately make the decision to export the moderately contaminated soils off-site if that is better for our long-term plans. And so the analysis that we're doing is evaluating the on-site containment versus the exporting of the material off-site to a certified landfill. And once we've made that decision, that information will go into our basis of design report and then into our remedial design efforts. And that's my update. Be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Brian. If folks have any questions, please do raise your hand, or you could also enter them into the chat. Barbara. You're muted if you're trying to speak.
Yes, thank you. I have a question concerning the gathering of information. Is it my understanding, Brian, that Metro is looking for public input at this time?
Thank you for the question, Barbara. What we're doing is we are working with PHCC to review the analysis as we're advancing it, and to provide comments along the way. I believe they have forwarded that from time to time to other community groups and organizations. And so we receive some public input and thoughts from folks.
Okay. Well,
but we're not specifically going through a public comment period on this report.
Okay, because in 2019, one of the Metro counselors, Ms. Rojas, requested public input on the cleanup of Willamette Cove. And I'm just wondering, since every single community group working on the Superfund, including, all the groups representing the public, and then Willamette Riverkeeper, as well as Audubon, would like to see contamination, all contamination, hazardous contamination removed from the site. What further public input do you need beyond that? I'm wondering. I mean, that was pretty complete public input there.
Yeah, I agree. We've got all of that input documented, and that all of that input is being incorporated into the report and into the analysis.
Okay.
Barbara, was there a second part to your question? I wasn't sure. It sounded like you had something else to add.
I think that was all I did want to ask about the containment cell. I'm curious about a containment cell. It says that a containment cell sounds like it might be lined. Are we talking about a lined containment cell? Or are we what is define containment cell?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't have detailed understanding of the proposed design, but based on my rough understanding is that it would not be a lined facility or structure. It would be unlined, and it would be capped with clean soil.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to imagine how that's going to be a very workable situation as far as containment goes, being as it's sitting on sand and subject to rainfall and underground water movement. So that's kind of it's a curious definition. But thank you.
So if I were to, Barbara, is it correct then to say that there's still a question that you're asking about how does the containment cell function?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So if we can't answer that now, I think that might be something we could come back and provide some information on.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Brian?
Sure.
And it looks like we have another, I'm not sure who iPhone 13 is, but they have their hand raised, so go ahead.
Hi, Cassie Cohen here from Portland Harbor Community Coalition on my phone. So yeah, Brian, it's been a moment and I'm trying to recall. So, I mean, so Alex Lopez is basically representing us providing technical input on the contingency assessment and drafts. But I may as well just ask you here, since folks, at least we have one interested community member, like, is it appropriate, is it okay for us to forward the 80% draft on to PHCC members who want to get any input to Alex, to our team, before he has to submit Friday or Monday? That's fair to do?
Yes, Cassie, that's fine if that's something that you would like to do.
Sounds good. So yeah, so basically, I think there's only like 5 community members here, including myself. But Barbara, happy to forward that over to you right away so you can take a look at it. But
Thank you,
yeah,
Kathy.
Alex,
Appreciate it. Yeah.
and anyone else who wants that.
Great. Any other questions for Brian? Cassie, did you have another question, or is your hand just still up?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay, so the next topic was just, well, first of all, thank you, Brian, for that update. We are just going to move ahead. We're moving through this pretty quickly, so I think we'll be adjourning early this afternoon, which I think might be a good thing for all of us. So I wanted to hand it over to Allie Hansen to provide just a short update about what's going on with the Oregon Department of State Lands, and including the closure. Allie?
Thank you, Jessica, and hello again, everyone. I'm Allie Ryan Hansen, the Communications Manager for the Department of State Lands. I appreciate having a few minutes tonight to give a couple state lands updates. First, we are proceeding with the temporary closure of Willamette Cove waters so that water, soil, and sediment samples can be collected. That closure is June 15th through September 5th. We started outreach to folks to ensure that people are aware of the upcoming closure and know to avoid the area. We've started direct email outreach to communities and partners, and we'll be continuing with direct and ongoing outreach to people living aboard boats, as well as social media and media outreach as the closure gets closer. We're going to also do outreach as needed throughout the closure, just to ensure the ongoing safety of the community and river users during the sampling work. Sorry about that. My family is doing a group text. So if you hear a train, it's not a train, it's my family. Any help that you can give in spreading the word about the closure would be wonderful. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If folks haven't already seen the closure info, we've got a great communications toolkit that has email and social shareables. So please help let folks know. And then the second state lands update is that we and other state agencies are beginning our budget development for the 2023-2025 biennium. And just an FYI that our DSL budget request routinely includes funding for our Portland Harbor work. We are going to hold our first budget information session tomorrow night at 5:30 p.m. on Zoom. I will put that meeting info in the chat as well. That will be an overview of our budget and legislative concept ideas with lots of time for questions and conversation. So please do join us if you can. We'd love to see you all there.
And Allie, do I recall correctly that that's just the first of those kinds of conversations? There's others that will be taking place too.
It is. We have quite long ways to go before the states agencies even submit their budget requests, and we'll be having multiple conversations. This conversation coming up tomorrow is really just a first conversation. Oh, I also wanted to mention we're going to record it. It'll be on our YouTube channel if folks aren't able to make it.
Is there, Cassie, I see you too. Just one more question for Allie. Just is there is there a web page that has everything that includes the like all of the, like a schedule of all of the upcoming?
There's not. So there is not. This first info session is the only one that's on the books right now. We'll be sharing more at dsl.oregon.gov on the homepage as things firm up. We also know that we'll be talking with the land board about this. We take our budget requests to the land board for their consideration, and we'll be doing that on June 14th, I believe, Tuesday, June 14th. It'll be before the land board for their consideration as well.
Great, thank you. And I see, Cassie, you have your hand up?
Jessica, isn't there a council hearing?
Cassie, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There you, yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, is there a council hearing, city council hearing tomorrow that is talking about making a decision? Is there going to be a decision or a discussion or decision about utility rates, including the Superfund surcharge tomorrow that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of. Are you seeing that on the agenda?
Somebody told me, but I have not confirmed.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. And I had touched base with Annie before she went on vacation too, just to confirm there wasn't anything kind of coming down the pike in the next couple of weeks before we had this meeting, to make sure if there was anything I would be able to share back with y'all.
Do you mind checking with the BES folks that are tracking the utility rates setting to confirm like what the timeline is on that? Because I thought that decision comes with the adoption of the annual budget for the city.
Yeah, I can definitely reach out to find out, and also just check the agenda to see what's on there, because I'm not sure what's on. I haven't looked at the council agenda for this week.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I saw, Allie, there was another question too. I don't know if you saw that about in the chat.
Yes, and the question from Lisa is, with the water closure, do we need to close the Cathedral Park swimming area? For example, contaminated soil in the river could be sent down river to the popular swim spot. I am going to ask technical experts to weigh in on that with the sampling I think the question is the sampling going to kick up soil that could then go downriver?
The answer is no. All good. The work we're doing is really limited and localized to Cove.
Thanks, Kyle.
Great. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you.
And any other questions, comments about the closure? Okay. Any questions or not, excuse me, any announcements? Do folks have any announcements that they want to share with the group today?
Paul, go ahead. He's raising his hand old school.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank those folks who have taken the time to share their comments during public testimony with the Metro Council. Metro Council always appreciates hearing from members of the community. If you haven't seen the emails that I've shared, or you are interested in speaking to Metro Council, every Thursday morning at 10:30 is public comment opportunity. Once in a while, they will cancel their Thursday morning meetings, and I apologize in advance for that. But if you have heard anything related to Metro and Willamette Cove, and you want to make your thoughts known to Metro Council, you can do so Thursday mornings at 10:30, 3 minutes uninterrupted. And the dates I wanted to just make sure people were aware of, based on Brian's presentation on the contingency remedy. On June 28th, that's a council work session, and we can remind you of these through email or at our next meeting of this group. But on June 28th is a council work session where we will discuss the contingency remedy report. And then a month later, July 28th, is when council is scheduled to make their decision on how these soils should be handled. For every Thursday in between June 28th and July 28th, they will have an opportunity to receive public input, public comment on this. So if you'd like to share your thoughts on this, please know that you can do it Thursday mornings at 10:30, and probably sometime after the work session and before their council business meeting on July 28th is the most opportune time to share your thoughts on that. And Cassie, is your question for me, or is it just a general announcement?
Yes, for you. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Could you also, do you mind also elaborating to share with folks what, a handful of us at PHCC had requested recently, and what you are still exploring, what staff is still exploring around
Yeah, I'm happy
getting.
to.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, some folks from the community have commented that they'd like to see Metro engage with the community sooner, particularly around eventual master planning and what will the site look like. And so we've been working with Cassie and a few others to see how we can do that while we just started our tribal engagement. So a couple of things that might be of interest to you. At the next meeting of this group, if the agenda allows, we will be bringing Metro's Tribal Affairs Advisor to come to this meeting and explain our tribal engagement framework and the conversations that Metro has been having in a government-to-government consultation relationship with tribes. Now, this began as part of the contingency remedy, and we have just started talking to tribes about topics that are very important to them as it relates to the entirety of Portland Harbor, but specifically Willamette Cove. What Cassie was referring to was, how do we honor that and not shortchange our conversations with tribes, but also maybe move forward or start conversations with community members about the eventual master planning and configuration of Willamette Cove. So we're working on that. We're not quite ready for prime time to give an explanation or share with you sort of how that plan might roll out, but it will be happening within this next fiscal year. So the first step that I think will interest you is when you hear next month, or if the agenda allows, from Katie of our staff, Katie McDonald, our Tribal Affairs Advisor, about our tribal engagement framework, and then the community engagement will build from there. I look forward to sharing this with you as we develop it and as we can lay a clearer path for the work that will be done on the uplands of Willamette Cove. And just so you know, the work I'm describing is, of course, after the site is cleaned up. And I'm really talking about how site development might eventually play out for people that enjoy that site and want to continue seeing it.
Thank you both. I saw, it looks like Kasmira had her hand up as well.
Hello, thank you, everybody. So I didn't hear, I heard Ali paraphrase the question about the swimming spot, but I didn't hear the answer. Because I put a question in the chat about as we do the sampling. Thank you.
Sorry, I was eating some chips. Yeah, no issue there. What we're doing is very localized in the Cove, so it won't go downstream.
Thank you so much. So I will, Kasmira, did you have any follow-up questions for that? Couldn't tell.
No, I am new to this process. I've been to several meetings, but I know it's been going on for years. So it's probably been something that's discussed, but I just felt like it was a question I needed to know. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're here and for bringing up those questions. So I will say, so one of the things in response to question that
Jessica, I think you froze.
Jessica froze.
Okay, so Barbara, do you want to go ahead and ask your question until Jessica thaws?
Yes, I will do that. I have a question, a follow-up question from the last person, Kasmira. It wasn't clear to me. Okay, the answer is no, that there will not be sediment floating downstream to Cathedral Park. Exactly how are you going to stop sediment from flowing downstream? Is there a silk curtain? Is there a metal curtain? How is that going to occur? Because sediment gathering is a fairly messy process from my understanding. How are you going to stop it?
The work we're doing really isn't stirring up a lot of sediment. We're not going in with heavy, buckets or anything dredging. It's very localized equipment. It will stir up a little bit of sediment, but it dissipates so quickly. We don't need to do silk curtains or anything like that.
Okay. All right.
Is it possible, Kyle, for you to describe a little bit what you're doing?
We're doing a lot of things, but the main thing is I'm sure a lot of you saw what they did at Cathedral Park when EPA did the drilling. We're replicating a lot of that. So it's going down with the core that's, this big, and you're pushing it into the sediment and taking out cores and sampling it.
So the sampling is very discreet down a tube. It's not like scraping up the top of the surface.
Right.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you, Kyle. Does that help, Barbara?
Yes, it helps.
Okay, great.
Can you all hear me now? I got a message from Elizabeth saying that I froze earlier, so apologies for that. I did put a couple of items into the chat in reference to Cassie's question about council agenda items. There is one coming up tomorrow that is in regards to BES's sewer and stormwater rates. And it includes, I sent the link to the ordinance, and then there's also a link to another document. And actually, I can actually just include the link in here. And so you can see what is being referenced related to Portland Harbor. I actually didn't know this was coming up this week. So I'll just say that. And what it looks like is in terms of what the rate will be for Portland Harbor is in there. So you can see what that is, and note about the rates applying to all users, residential and non-residential. And it has information in there about being based on the both cubic feet of water consumption as well as the square footage of impervious area per month. If folks are interested in learning more about that, please let me know.
I'm just really bummed that at least your teammates at BES or whoever and Water Bureau didn't get the word out earlier, because I thought there was going to be some public involvement, public engagement around this stuff before it went to vote.
Yeah.
Well, the rates were covered in a hearing last week.
Yeah, well, PHCC had been in meetings, requested a meeting with these folks like months and months and months ago, and they said they'd let us know about it. We didn't get informed about that hearing, so kind of passed us by anyway. I'm glad you knew about it, but we didn't know about it.
In general, every year, there's the city council has the budget, and then they also have to, at the same time, by June 1st, have to pass the rates for all the utilities and all of the other various fees and so forth. So that's been a lot of what city council's been both tomorrow and last week.
So Cassie, the thing that we had talked whenever we had met with our friends at Water and with you and a few other folks, that was about the rate study, and more of that coming up later. So this isn't the only time to engage in that, and I apologize for that. I mean, if in terms of not sharing this information with you about this coming up next week, but I will follow up. I know this isn't done. I think this is just for this year. For this fiscal year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, why no notice about the hearing and all this stuff this year? I understand the rate setting hasn't finalized, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, the other thing that I totally hear you on that. I did not know that was coming up. And I will also say too, I don't know if folks are aware that you can sign up to receive regular updates about what's coming from about the council agenda, which can be helpful for kind of monitoring some of that stuff as well. But I totally hear you, Cassie. And, if folks are interested in signing up to provide comments, that's something that could still be done.
So I'd like to make an announcement. Hopefully everybody on this call is aware that on June 25th, the state, the city, the port, PHCC, and Metro are co-hosting an event that we're calling the Willamette Cove Environmental Field Day. It is a great opportunity for people to come out and actually see some of the testing equipment, see maps of where the testing's happening, understand what the methodology behind how the sampling plans were developed, actually get to, I'm a dork, you get to manipulate the tools that they use to dig up the dirt. And it's a really good opportunity to bring neighbors and families and people who live in the area to come out. The place where we're holding the event has a really amazing overlook over Willamette Cove itself. It's at the corner of Pierce Avenue and Crawford Street. So we will be sending information out to this group of folks. And I noticed there's someone from the University Park Neighborhood Association here. It would be great if you could help people get to know what's happening. I think, to Barbara Quinn's questions and some of the others, understanding how we do the work, I think is really helpful to understanding what the outcomes and results are and having some confidence in the results that we get down the road. So the purpose of this event is really to have people understand how we gather the data that informs the development of the remedial design process. And this is a great opportunity to have all the people who are doing different parts of the work in one place and be able to ask questions and really understand how we're approaching this. So we'll be getting information out about that quickly, hopefully, I think this week. But as much help as people can provide to us to making sure that neighbors and community know about it, it's going to be super awesome. Super awesome.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth. Any other announcements today? Okay, anybody opposed to adjourning early? All right, very good. All right, thank you all so much.